Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our wonderful webinar this evening with Rob Shorter from the Doughnut Economy Action Lab. My name is Dr. Michelle Maloney. I'm the co-founder and national convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AELA. And one of our initiatives, the Greenprints initiative, has been putting together a wonderful series of Greenprints exchange events. And that's what our talk is tonight. We were lucky enough to secure Rob Shorter from the Doughnut Economy Action Lab to come and talk to us about the remarkable growth, which is ironic actually, the remarkable burst in enthusiasm people have had for doughnut economics globally. So in a moment, I'll introduce Rob, but first I will make sure that I introduce things the proper way, including acknowledging country. So I'll just share my slides. So many buttons, things happening. There we go. So yes, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Tonight's webinar will go from 6 p.m. till about 7:30. After my introductory remarks, I've invited Rob to speak with us for 30 to 40 minutes about all of the terrific work that they're doing around the world, and in particular places looking at the doughnut economics framework. I'd like to acknowledge country. I live, work and play on the ancient and beautiful lands of the Yagara Turrbal peoples here in North Brisbane. And this beautiful photo is of the water lilies at Nudgee waterholes near where I live. This is where I walk my dogs and watch all the beautiful butterflies. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, acknowledge the remarkable governance system that cared for country and cared for kin since time immemorial. And I'd also like to acknowledge my personal commitment and the professional commitment of our organisations to trying to play our role in decolonising our hearts and minds and acknowledging the ongoing impacts of colonisation on the living world and on the first peoples of the continent. I'd invite you all to take a nice big deep breath and relax into our discussion tonight. Maybe have a think about where you live, what you see every day, the things you love. And if you would like to write in the chat where you are, what brought you here tonight, what you're hoping to learn, we'd love to see that in the chat. And also, if you have questions for Rob or myself, please feel free to put them in the chat. After Rob's finished his talk, we should have a good half an hour for questions and discussion, and I'll try to collect your questions through the chat. If you prefer to put them towards the end of Rob's talk, that would be grand, because then I can find them. Tonight's lovely gathering is brought to you by the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, and in particular our Greenprints initiative. Also by Regen Brisbane and the New Economy Network Australia, or NENA. What I would like to do is take the opportunity to share with you for just a couple of minutes a little bit of an overview of what the Greenprints approach is, why we designed it inside AELA, how it connects to doughnut economics, and who around Australia is starting to engage with this framework, which is uniquely Aussie and starts with caring for country as a starting point, but weaves a storyline through the things we need to do as human beings, as living entities in a beautiful place, right through to our human governance and our economic system. So the Australian Earth Laws Alliance was created 10 years ago now. We're advocates for systems change to help support industrialised societies to move from human-centred to earth-centred governance. We began 10 years ago as a small group of mostly lawyers interested in rights of nature and earth-centred law, but really inspired by the theory of earth jurisprudence, which is actually a broader framing of governance of human societies more generally. We've auspiced the New Economy Network Australia many years ago now, and it's now its own cooperative. And I'm also proud that AELA has partnered with Indigenous elders to create Future Dreaming, a not-for-profit organisation, and Regenerative Songlines Australia is supported by those initiatives. If you haven't heard of them, please do look them up. And if you have heard of them, please do continue to come along to our discussions and events. So AELA was inspired by two core things. One was the deep ecology framework of earth jurisprudence, which calls for a big shift from the image on the left to the image on the right, the framing of seeing ourselves as just one humble organism amongst a world full of beautiful biodiversity, and shifting our governance systems, law, economics, all of the rules and systems that we live by so that we can nurture rather than destroy the living world. We were inspired by Earth jurisprudence, but we are also inspired by the First Nations knowledge systems and first laws, place-based, unique laws to protect people and to care for place and to manage resources sustainably. So the Greenprints approach, and I've only got 2 more minutes and I'm done, but the Greenprints approach provides a practical step-by-step approach to help people understand both the big picture and the very small details of how to bring all the good stuff together to transform our societies to be regenerative. Very importantly, it connects many varied concepts, models and methods, and what we would refer to in Western knowledge systems as different disciplines, what other cultures might look to as simply becoming an ecological society. Greenprints is just a play on the idea of blueprints, nothing original there. It actually started as a bit of a nickname for complex concepts, and now it's stuck. Greenprints is a process, and it helps communities, councils and others produce very rigorous analyses and scenarios for what the future could look like if we pattern ourselves into place and live in a regenerative way within our ecological limits. Because if we want to shift our societies from human-centered to earth-centered, we really have to work out how to get there. Big picture concepts are brilliant. They help us reframe our minds. Greenprints is all about the steps that many community groups want to use to bring complex concepts into some sort of pathway, even if it's a chaotic one. So our vision, like many other people, is a beautiful, thriving world where human beings are part of the system, but not a destroyer of worlds, and where plants, animals, water systems, all of the biosphere is thriving. This is a map of one version of pre-colonial Australia and that which continues today. And as you'll see, it's a good reminder, Aboriginal peoples learnt very early on how to live within place and how to nurture it. And Mary Graham, Indigenous elder and co-founder of Future Dreaming, refers to the system of governance that was here pre-1788 and which continues and is reforming in many places. She refers to it as a form of sacralized ecological stewardship. I think it's a lovely way to think about caring for the living world and being part of it. And as she will say, and many others, and science has now proven, Aboriginal people didn't just come here a long time ago and wander about. They settled into bioregions, and scientific evidence has now proven what many of us knew. Some people have been living in literally the same place for 50,000 years. And that is a very long time to become part of a place and pattern yourself in and learn and love how to live there. Western science actually does a whole bunch of maps that are really interesting too, which is caring about a place from a bioregional perspective. And bioregions are kind of Western science's way of saying this is how Mother Nature tells us who she is. Rainforests versus deserts versus open grasslands. So Greenprints is interested in how we get from excessive industrialized societies to living within our bioregions, catchments, ecosystems. We've got some basic steps that bring together ideas around human governance with sustainable economies and practical projects. We've got these core steps which look really deceptively simple about thinking differently in the first place, defining our ecological boundaries for whatever project or community we're looking at, understanding those foundations deeply and profoundly. And it's number 4 where all the fun stuff happens, actually understanding human activities past and present. And then we look at health checks, develop scenarios. We use the collective decision-making processes that we kind of create through the beginning of the process to develop really rigorous ideas and plans and join up the dots. I'll jump over the why we need it. I don't have time to do a full analysis, but what I'd like to share with you is that the nice thing about Greenprints is it brings a whole range of different tools and systems together. Doughnut economics is one of them. We link it in through both understanding ecological boundaries, which is both local and planetary boundaries, but also understanding human activities. And here in Australia, I tortured a lovely artist so that we could create our own earth-centered donut. So we've got our bioregional foundations and caring for country. We've got our plants and our animals, so we can create a safe operating space for all of life on Earth. That's what we're interested in. And if anyone's interested in us, then please get in touch with Greenprints. We've got communities, a couple of councils and a number of high schools and different folks at university interested in, and they are using Greenprints as a bit of a framework. And so is Regen Brisbane. So that's the end of my cheerful 10-minute advertisement for the Greenprints approach. And I hope that for some folks, it's a nice way to see how it all links together and why the Greenprints Exchange is so excited to introduce Rob Shorter to talk about doughnut economics, both the conceptual phenomenon and the practicalities of how things are happening. So before I introduce Rob, what I'd like to mention is that the Lucky Bugger is currently up in the Orkney Islands, which is definitely one of the most beautiful places I can think of, outside of Australia, of course. So welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining us from the land of puffins and the beautiful Neolithic site of Skara Brae. How are you tonight?
Thanks so much, Michelle. I'm very well. And yeah, just mentioning puffins, it was early this week that I went out and saw, I'm just visiting my family who live here. And we went out with a new long telescope that my dad's got, and we were looking at puffins on the cliff, and sort of, it was a wonderful moment. So thank you for mentioning that.
Oh, they're just gorgeous. But welcome, Rob. I've done a very basic intro, but please, over to you now. I'll let you know when you've hit 35 minutes or so, but we'd love to hear all about what you guys are up to with the Doughnut Economy Action Lab.
Great. Thank you so much. Wonderful to join you this evening. So yeah, I work for DEAL, which is Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And our intention is to help people put the ideas of doughnut economics into practice. And it's great to see just over there in the overview of Greenprints, how you're seeing doughnut economics as one of the tools within the framing of your work. And that's how we intend and invite people to use the ideas of doughnut economics, not necessarily as the banner for organizing, whilst there are places doing that. It's very much something that we offer that can help behind the scenes if people want to use it that way. And as a kind of an idea that people can have an easy access into the ideas of economics, because economics can not so often be thought of as something that is only for maybe the privileged few who've had time to study it and go deep into the equations and the science of economics, but actually we try to take it out the minds of the academics and policymakers and politicians and into hands of everyone, so we can all begin to shape together what the pathways forward could be in this very rapidly changing 21st century, where we need to have an adaptive mindset, not a fixed mindset where here's a problem and a solution to go with it. No, things are so complex and constantly changing that we need to embrace the complexity. It doesn't go away if we ignore it. So how do we find methods that welcome everyone into that the complex predicaments we have today? So to literally put the ideas of doughnut economics in the hands of everyone. In the next minute or so, I invite you to go and actually find something that's either sitting next to you on the sofa or the table or somewhere else in your house that actually looks like a donut with two rings. So if you hop up and go and find that, I think it'll be great if we can just find those and create a little gallery of people who are, who are showing the donut, and then I'm going to talk through what it literally means. So I'm going to show mine here now. This is a little pot that's in my parents' house, and I love it. We've got a CD. Michelle's found a CD. That's perfect. Lovely. And the shiny space for humanity. That's what that is, containing all your favorite records and music. So I've got a little pot which has literally got a hole in. I love this. This is got a beautiful handmade crafted thing, so it feels like it's a nice sort of representation. I did this for the first time last week, and someone held up a loo roll, and I thought that's a toilet roll. And I thought that's an interesting sort of way of thinking about the goal. But thank you for sharing those, some beautiful images sort of cropping up on the screen. So let's have a look. I'm actually on, I can only really see. There's got some sellotape, great, and there's some bracelets. Excellent. Oh, what's that? That's a gorgeous crafted thing. My fan, that's gorgeous. And some wire.
It's
and
a pool toy, swimming pool toy.
Oh, is it okay? The ones you dive down and try and pick up again. A few people have got these lovely sort of coiled either wires or things like that. So that's great. Brilliant. And there's a Michelle. What's that? Is that a coaster? I see.
It's a jar lid for preserving, so we'll preserve the social.
Oh, that's great. Do you make your own preserves?
No, I use it for overnight oats, but I'm aspirational.
Fantastic. Great. And that's a nice shiny telescope looking thing, James. oh, what is that? Oh, it's at the bottom of a bottle. It's quite hard over the tiny Zoom screens to see things. So yeah, so the goal of the donut, well, the shape of the donut is quite a commonly found item. It's quite a common thing that we can see, and people resonate with this. It is something that represents an offer for the goal for humanity in the 21st century. Rather than endless GDP growth, it's a goal where we recognize we have, on this delicately balanced living planet, we have people and we have all the rest of the living world. And so the inner ring represents the social foundation of what it means to live a good life. And that's for us to define. And then on the outer boundary, we have the ecological ceiling, beyond which we're overshooting the planetary boundaries. And we're going into the danger zone where we are undermining life's earth supporting systems. And so it's our goal to meet the needs of people within the means of the living planet and get into this space of the donut. Now, this can be described in many ways. It can be described academically, and earth system scientists describe the planetary boundaries academically, and there are lots of different ways of describing the fundamental human needs and the subjectivity of that. But essentially, if we can explain this idea quickly and simply, we can welcome anyone to the conversation. So I've heard people describe it as saying to children, so we got people, right? Yeah. And we got a planet. Yeah. Well, turns out we're not treating either really well. Oh, so that's the problem we've got. We're not supporting people, and we're not taking care of people. We're not taking care of the planet. We actually want to get into this space in the donut, you know, the bit where the sprinkles are. And I heard Imi Kaur of Civic Square in Birmingham describe it that way. And just, if you can explain it to I guess a 5-year-old in 30 seconds, then actually children tend to get this most intuitively, most quickly, because this is such a simple idea when we think about it. And I'm going to flip to showing the sort of presentation I've prepared now. So it's a very visual idea, and it's a new shape of progress. Instead of endless expansion, it's one of, sorry, I just need to reorientate the way things are. Oh no, I can't do that. Oh, why can't I do that? That's very strange.
It looks okay from our side, Rob.
Great. Yeah, I've just got lots of faces on the screen, so I can't see my whole screen, but I'll be able to remember what I'm talking about, I'm sure. So instead of endless expansion, this GDP growth curve ever flying upwards, we have a different shape of progress, one of balance. So between the social foundation and ecological ceiling. And actually we want to be in that space in the middle, which might actually start to, we might find patterns and rhythms and ways of sort of thriving within this space, the safe and just space for humanity. But the shape of progress as balance is not a new one. And so if we look at the symbols through history, these deep cultural symbols show us balance as well. So it's something to have a beautiful visual goal, one that represents balance and living in balance between our needs and the planet's needs. And so this is the fundamental shape of the donut. And actually, if we then add quantifiable data to it, this is when we get the compass for prosperity, for humanity in the 21st century, where we've crowdsourced the UN Sustainable Development Goals to say, well, what do all of the nation's governments think the fundamentals of a good life? And then we've deferred to the scientists, the Earth system scientists, to say, well, what are the dimensions of the living planet we really need to be able to measure and quantify and not go beyond? And so these 12 social foundations and 9 planetary boundaries create the donut that we often show as the sort of the goal for humanity, to meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. But if we were to measure where we are on all of these things, we can actually see that we are way out of balance, with the red in the middle showing there are billions of people still falling short on the essentials of life in the middle of the donut. And we are collectively, as humanity, overshooting 4 of the planetary boundaries, and 2 have now actually been quantified to now show that we're overshooting both on fresh water withdrawals, and we're actually overshooting on chemical pollution at a greater degree than we'd ever considered before. So we're the first generation to see this diagram and this selfie of humanity. And so it's our choice now that we can see it, now it's made visible to us. Do we continue with the economic thinking, the business models, the public policies that have got us in this position? Or do we take this chance, this moment, to reorientate, to pivot, to go in a new direction, and to reimagine the thinking, the business models, the public policies, so that they are designed to bring us back into balance from both sides at the same time? And so that's this is the sort of the challenge we propose with Doughnut Economics Action Lab. You know, how do we create the conditions for people to come together and to reimagine what is possible, so that we are designing in ways that are compatible with this goal? If we look at the national level, the picture changes. We see that every country has its own journey towards the donut based on its history of legacy of exploitation in many ways. I won't go into all the details of that, but we can see that some countries need to focus on what it means to meet social needs. Some have the role of coming back within planetary boundaries. We need to recognize that all countries are interconnected, both with their past and current relations. And so we invite everyone to recognize what is your specific goal of your place, but also how you deeply connected with all the other places and the paths that they might be on as well, to come back into balance with the living planet. So if we are to come back within the donut, we offer within Doughnut Economics 2 key ways to design our economies that can sort of be patterns that can be acknowledged across all of the things I've mentioned, from business models, but also public policy and so forth. And those 2 things are to be distributive by design, which essentially is mainly speaking to the social foundation, and then regenerative design, which is essentially referring to the ecological ceiling. So taking those one by one, I'm going to start with regenerative design. If we recognize the economic thinking that we've inherited from the 21st century, we've inherited linear industrial production systems which take Earth's resources, make them into things we want, use them for a while, sometimes only once, and then throw them away. There is no away. And so we recognize that this degenerative linear system is running down Earth's life supporting systems and is pushing us over planetary boundaries. And so it's our choice. We can now reimagine and remake and recreate the systems which provision for our needs that are regenerative by design. Now, nature is absolutely genius. It does everything regeneratively. Life creates conditions for more life. There is no waste. Waste from one process is food for the next. And so how can we mimic nature's design to regenerate biological materials and restore, repair, refurbish technical materials that we've already created, so that we're working with and within the cycles of the living world? Now, we're learning all the time how to do this better and better. This is circular economics is kind of really the forefront of the thinking in this area, but it also means we need a different orientation to the way we create. So how can we use Earth's materials more carefully, creatively, collectively, and slowly? And so this is what it can look like in practice, where we're the impact on land can move from one of extraction to actually deep care and restoration. And in terms of the technical materials we use, where we don't throw things away into earth sinks, be it the waters, the rivers and the oceans and the lakes and the land, and into the communities that are deeply impacted by this waste of us throwing things away, out of sight, out of mind. But actually, how do we recognize all the potential of the things that that are at the bottom of that linear process, so that they can be repaired, reused, refurbished, from systemic kind of sectorial policies of circular thinking through to community sort of supported repair cafes where we're all learning a new skill, connecting with each other. There are so many possibilities of how we think and act regeneratively. And so there are so many possibilities cropping up all over the world. If we just gesture towards this way of thinking, the creativity and knowledge of everyone can bring a multiplicity of ways of being regenerative. The second is on distributive design. So if we recognize the pattern of the 20th century and the economic thinking we've inherited, it has been deeply divisive, such that value and opportunity is captured in the hands of a few, giving rise to the 1%, and dramatic inequality. The number of billionaires has doubled from 1,000 to 2,000 in the last decade. And so we need to recognize, how can we create design economies that are actually distributive by design, where value and opportunity are shared far more equitably with all those who co-create it. And that turned out to be everyone in society. And so we can ask the questions not only of how is value and opportunity distributive, but also what are the sources of wealth creation? Who owns the land? Who owns the housing? Who owns the businesses that generate opportunity and value for people around the world? How can we layer in more and more benefits to all who are sharing in the creation of wealth? So some examples, we work with businesses to look at their deep design and how they can be, for example, in this instance, employee owned. So the value and opportunity are shared with employees, and they can set up the purpose for their organization to benefit the community. Now, how can ideas be spread around the world and rather than and created locally, rather than necessarily globalized production, shipping things and the carbon impact of that? So there are so many ways to think about wealth distribution, wealth creation, space distribution, sort of ideas, and housing, how that's more of a human right rather than an investment luxury. The way we think about enterprises or energy, so many ways to think distributively by design. So these two design patterns we see as the means of coming back within balance from both sides of the donut. And we share these ideas and ways of exploring them on the Doughnut Economics website, Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which is doughuteconomics.org. And on this website, you can create your own profile and share how you're applying these ideas too, in what contexts, and the sort of how you're thinking about applying them, and any learnings you are finding from what your practice is. And this is what it looks like when you create an open source platform for people to share their ways of exploring these ideas. And there's a huge creativity amongst the people who are coming to Doughnut Economics. The donut is an unusual way of describing economics, and we know that people can be intimidated by the word economics, but no one's scared of donuts. And so you can invite all kinds of new types of conversation new people come to into the conversation through Doughnut Economics. And we offer tools to learn about what I've just described, tools to look at the donut, but also workshops to sort of move in and around the space and discuss, what do we feel about this goal? What do we think? Is it achievable? How might we do it? Let's learn about the ideas in more detail. There's introductory lectures that go in, if you really want to understand the ins and outs. There are playful videos and animations, and there's a puppet rap battle. There's all kinds of playful ways of getting into these ideas and inviting you to give your thoughts to them too. But we also offer, and what we're developing, is a series of tools to actually apply the ideas to transform places and to transform organizations. So I'm going to talk about those now, and how places around the world are beginning to use these tools for action. Before I go into that, just a last nod towards what it is we're creating. So this is an action lab. It's like everything is designed as an experiment. There's no set way of how this all works. You know, we're trialing this all out. Our idea is that 21st century economics will be practiced first and theorized later. And so, yeah, what does this practice look like? And the term lab, actually, if we think about it, it kind of brings up the connotations of, you know, people in white coats and sort of very scientific, where there are set experiments to do. But when thinking about things, and I'm the communities and art lead within Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And so I like to think of a few different metaphors that one of these might resonate a bit more with you. The first is a bakery, and this aligns much better with the idea of a donut. Where instead of creating experiments, we're creating recipes to apply these ideas that everyone can play a part in, both coming up with the recipe and getting involved, getting their hands in the mixture and creating the lovely smelling futures that we want that taste better. And so you can see that something's interesting's going on in the bakery, and invite more and more people to play a part, and then share these recipes with other bakeries around the world. And the next one is a playground, because, as I mentioned, it's an idea that people find very playful. And so how can we recognize the play isn't something that is just for kids? You know, kids learn the world through play. So how, in this 21st century, where we need to reimagine and relearn how to behave responsibly within the planetary's limits and behave regeneratively and distributively, how can we create powerful methods for playing new ideas of economics? And the last one is or by no means last, I mean, these are just three I'm offering, is an artistic studio. And I said, my role title has art in the name, and it's actually really about bringing your creative expression to all these ideas, and that can be inspiring for many others to then bring theirs too. And so we see people use art to explore Doughnut economics in so many ways. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the way in which people are applying these ideas to places. So if the goal of humanity at that global scale is the donut, how can we bring this idea down to our locality, and how can our place help bring humanity into the donut? So to do that, we've made a conceptual shift where we actually unroll the donut and actually moves more from a donut to what you could say is a baguette, where we've still got the social foundation and ecological ceiling. But what we're really interested in doing is zooming into the green space in the middle to say, how can our places really get into that space, and also bring in the local angle and the global angle too. So when we do that, we bring in the local and the global. You can see there's these dotted lines. That actually creates 4 different perspectives in looking at your place: locally and socially, locally ecologically, globally ecologically, and globally socially. And actually, we think that that becomes quite an interesting space to start exploring things going on already, aspirations of place, kind of ideas, interconnections across the two. And so what we get is this canvas of what we refer to as the unrolled donut. And in this space of the unrolled donut, we ask this question: how can our place become home to thriving people in a thriving place, while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? So that's bringing in the global goal of the donut, and it's bringing in your local aspirations and what it means for thriving people in a thriving place. So bit by bit, we break down that question. So we offer that as the overall kind of compass way of thinking for this donut unrolled process. But we then can immediately break that down. What's our local aspiration? What are our global responsibilities? So local aspirations, how can all the people of our place thrive? And only the people of your place can define that. What are the unique aspirations, the cultural, the history? What's COVID made visible that previously wasn't visible? Whose voice isn't yet heard in this, and how can we invite more and more people to co-create a vision for thriving people in your place? Now, the second one is one that's maybe less intuitive, which is, how can our place be as generous as the wild land next door? Michelle spoke about biomes. And in your biome, what is the unique genius of nature in that place? Now, how does nature sequester carbon? How does it store groundwater? How does it cycle nutrients? How does it regulate the temperature? How does it house biodiversity? How does it create the conditions for more and more life? And how can we design to be within our places and do that too? And so with Greenprints, starting here is such a wonderful place to recognize what's the life source of energy of our place. And if our place can be thriving, the life in our place can be thriving, then we too, as being deeply embedded within these living systems, will be able to thrive as well. So how can we bring these two things to, together as our local aspirations to thrive socially and ecologically? But we depend upon communities around the world for our clothes and housing and material goods that we have. So what's our global responsibility to all those places, and recognize how can our place respect the health of the whole planet and of the communities that we're interconnected with? How can we respect the well-being of all people? And those are the really, really tricky questions. So it can be great to create a local aspirations, but how do we make visible all of these things which we might not see when we're making choices locally? So that's what we're trying to do with these 4 lenses, and we invite places to explore them. And we offer these different dimensions as well to explore them. So if we have tools to explore all these different dimensions in isolation. The ones on the right-hand side are from the global donut, the 21 dimensions. But actually, if we look to the left, for example, how can our place be as generous as the wildland next door? We see the sort of 9, there's the 8 dimensions that come from biomimicry. And then the social dimensions are very much for you to define, but we offer these ones here as a nice starting place. And we offer a canvas for you then to start painting what we describe as a portrait of your place, which you can layer up and increasingly build a rich and richer picture as you add in what you know already about your current challenges and your changes already underway, signs of and seeds of the future, and the indicators and targets that you might bring to those. We invite people to bring in more qualitative aspects, the sense of place, the qualities of place, also the deeper questions that help us explore these complexities more, and the history that is the path-dependent history where we are, that has defined where we are now, and where might that go. So layering up all of these different ways of relating to these 4 lenses of the unrolled donut. And you can explore specific topics. You can put an idea, an initiative, a project, a policy in the center of the 4 lenses, and show how there are holistic benefits that can be recognized, not just the first one that you might think of, but actually you can see interconnections and various qualities that initiatives are doing across all of these 4 lenses. We invite people to draw and describe interconnections to make visible the full impact of what we and others are doing. So you might recognize electric cars as a great way of meeting mobility needs locally and having cleaner air locally. But let's think about the global interconnections of the sourcing of the materials needed for those and the impact on those communities. And so how can we bring in this holistic picture, a holistic way of thinking, and the interconnections that arise through that to all that we do? How can we exercise these muscles that we have collectively of interconnected thinking, of holistic thinking? It's a lot to think about, but if we can begin to exercise this way of thinking, we think it's going to create local plans and pathways that are embracing our global responsibilities. So here's the ideas being pioneered in the cities of Amsterdam, Portland, and Philadelphia. And in 2020, Amsterdam then published its City Doughnut, which was exploring all 4 of these lenses of what it means to have local aspirations with global responsibilities. And it was put into the Amsterdam City Plan for its circular strategy. And they're working through now what it means to having committed to that 2 years ago. How are they monitoring their progress for that? And residents around the city are able to then realize their permission to play in this area too, and come to this sort of citywide plan with their own ways of contributing to it. And Amsterdam inspired many places around the world. And just last month, we had a peer-to-peer sharing call with 40 places around the world, creating their own portrait of their place. And they're all bringing their unique way of exploring these within their own context and history and culture. And everyone has their own challenges. Everyone has their own pathway towards the donut. And so there's no one way. And we're trying not to say with this method that there is a one way. We're trying to give people the big framing questions that they can explore what their pathway would be and what their method would be to get there as well. But here are some of the ways that we are seeing cities get started from making process to hold potential strategies and policies up against, to going into some of the deeper things around city design, which I'll talk about in a second. So there are many ways in which cities are getting started. And so we within Doughnut Economics Action Lab are going to be hosting more webinars and peer-to-peer learning spaces where cities can be learning processes as more methods, I'm sure, will arise. But also communities are getting started. And that's one of the powerful things about this idea of Doughnut Economics. It's not just a policymaker's dream. It's also something that, is inviting to everyone. As I mentioned at the start of the call, you can explain it to children. You can explain it in a matter of moments. And this is Civic Square in Birmingham, who created this giant donut on the floor in this space that they're going to be transforming in the center of Birmingham in the UK. Creating the infrastructure in this space for a donut future. And they are creating so many playful and inviting, as they describe here, rituals, practices, everyday, extraordinary, deep participatory methods. So their approach is to create agency through literacy. And they're doing that both in terms of how we're meeting our needs, understanding our place, and actually getting quite scientific about what it means for our place to be thriving. How are they stewards of the land? How are they ecosystem restorers? And so it's a really powerful process that they're going through, and they're creating their own community or neighborhood portrait of place, inviting the perspectives of everyone, but also they're recognizing the power of peer-to-peer learning and creating these learning marathons and learning journeys for groups around the UK. And they've got this one international group, and everyone brings in their own learning question that they explore over 6 months. And the questions are all sort of made visible to everyone else in the group. And now they're beginning to share their learnings. Last night they had their halfway process sort of showcase event, so that they're sharing the stories of action. And this is so wonderful because it's recognizing that we can all have agency at an individual level, and then we recognize how we're bringing ourselves to the different spaces that we take, the different roles we take up within the economy, whether in the household, whether in the commons, whether in the market or the state. How are we bringing ourselves to the collective challenge, and exploring Doughnut Economics that way. And Leeds launched their own community created portrait of the city just a few weeks ago, and towards a safe, and actually I can't see the other part of the title because there's people's faces in the way, but safe and thriving, or safe and just, I can't remember the exact title, Leeds. And it was such a wonderful event where it was just an invitation to everyone to be part of this challenge together. And this is the report that they created. And so they're showing how you can unroll the donut and you can actually start this journey towards a thriving Leeds. And what does it mean for Leeds to get into the donut? Well, they recognize that we're not just looking forward. Let's look at where we've come from. Let's look at the history of innovation in our place. And Leeds within the Industrial Revolution was a pioneer. How can there be a pioneer towards a regenerative future? Now, they're measuring lots of social things here and just showing how many things that falling short on. And how many things here, ecologically speaking, they can describe, but are yet to measure. So there's many sort of spaces here in the quantification, but they're still able to understand the holistic picture of the place. Looking at a global ecological perspective, they're recognizing their impact, scaling it down to the sort of the impact of per person in Leeds, what are they impacts they're having around the world, and the materials that people are doing and the communities that they're the materials they're drawing in, the impact on the communities they're having in the world too. So they've created this 4-lens sort of portrait of their place, and they've rolled that back up. So they've then got this picture that they're offering to everyone in Leeds as a starting point for conversation to say, how can we go on this journey together? Let's horizon scan the wonderful things that are already happening, amplify that, dial that up, support that, get more voices involved. You know, what's the imagination of the voices not yet part of this? And how do we then dial down the things that are causing harm, and how we walk with those people to sort of find alternative ways of doing what they're doing. So that's a conversation starter. I've not actually included all the wonderful work in across Australia, but on Wednesday we've got a session where we're hearing from Regen Melbourne, who started not from a data perspective, but a community voice, lived experience, creating a portrait of Melbourne and what it might mean to move towards a thriving, regenerative Melbourne. And so these can both be conversation starters, starting from a data perspective, starting from a lived experience and vision perspective. But the idea is that you make a start and then you move forward together. And then this is then the Leeds event, exploring different themes through the 4 lenses: energy, housing, transport, food, and seeing some of the initial interconnections across these. So these are all available. Wrong slide, sorry. We've also got networks across places, and I see Regen Melbourne here. There's also Regen Brisbane and Sydney, and there's, you know, places around the world exploring what this means. It's everyone's welcome to be a part of the visioning of your place, and then the pathways towards transforming those. So here's an example of them working on the 4 lenses methodology in Copenhagen. And so these are tools that we have on the website to explore what these ideas mean, and how, you know, practical workshops that you can run, and examples of those. So the last thing I'm just going to share, though, is that we recognize once you've created a vision for your place, there's still the work to do in transforming the deeper invisible designs of cities and places, where we recognize there can be a mindset amongst the leaders and amongst many people in the place of how can our place grow, because it's actually in growth and GDP is going to be the only pathway forward. And how can we shift the mindset so it's away from how can our place grow to how can our place thrive? And we recognize that there are some deep design traits that enable us to move from a mindset of growth to a mindset of thriving, where we look at the purpose of the place. You know, has it got a thriving vision? We look at who it's networked, you know, with, you know, what are the ways in which people are gathering together to orientate towards this new goal? What are the international networks of solidarity that are helping us find pathways forward? And what are the governance, ownership, and financial structures that are also helping us move from one to the other? Because if those are still orientated towards growth, we could always have a purpose of thriving, but we're never really going to pivot forward. But we can also ask these questions. And here's an example of this workshop in Amsterdam, where they're exploring what we describe here as the powers to act across all of these deep design traits. Things need to let go of and leave behind. Things need to start, spread, and amplify. And this really is very last thing, how we look at enterprise design. And these same patterns can actually be used to recognize we have many organizations and businesses around the world that are designed to extract as much financial value out of their activity. And that's pushing us over planetary boundaries, and it's leaving billions of people falling short on the essentials of life. So how can we reorientate and redesign our organizations at the deepest level to layer in as many benefits as possible? And we recognize that these design traits that are hidden to most people can be made visible, and we can work through how we can orientate ourselves on each of these 5 design traits to pivot us towards a thriving goal. So there'll be tools arriving on the platform later in the year on both these things. And here's an example of an organization working through their deep design in an online workshop that we hosted recently. So just to summarize, how can we reorientate our economies to be regenerative and distributive, that are helping us come back into balance and get into the space of the donut. What's the role of our places in recognizing our both local aspiration and our global interconnected responsibilities and accountabilities? How can we transform our places and our enterprises so that they are orientated toward these goals as well? And how do we embrace the community of everyone who's looking at these ideas too, and create sort of the right ways of inviting, the right ways so everyone's part of the conversation, and the ways we can learn together in peer-to-peer spaces as we sort of start practicing what does it mean to apply these ideas and share what's working. And all these ideas are then on the Deal website, doughuneconomics.org, and you can connect with the people and the networks, and then find these tools, stories, and of change. So that's it, and just shy of the 40 minutes, and I'm going to pass back to Michelle.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rob. That went very quickly. It did not feel like 40 minutes. Well done. So folks, if you have questions, please do write them into the chat. I know you've all been listening intently. Couple coming in now. My first question, Rob, given that Regen Brisbane is going to be using the Doughnut, and in a lot of we're working with several other communities on the Greenprints process where the Doughnut will be part of it. In your experience, when groups start, just to give people an idea, how many folks are getting together? I know Melbourne had something like, I think 50 or 80 people across their 4 workshops, because I participated in a couple. But what are you seeing in other places like Leeds? How many folks do you need to sort of start getting this thing going?
So one thing I heard recently was the Devon Doughnut Collective started with 4, and now they're 180, 190 or something like that. So how many people do you need? Not many. And I guess it's how you start and how you create the conditions that welcome everyone come in. Because if you start with a lot of people and you feel that's a good enough size, not to say that starting a lot of people is wrong, that's fantastic if you can immediately appeal to that number of people, but how do you create the conditions at the start that are going to be welcoming to more and more people? Because actually your starting conditions can actually limit and they can create norms that other people might feel excluded from. So actually starting with 4 for Devon was quite a blessing, because then it was really about, well, how do we bring in more and more people? They created coffee and donut sessions, and it's just an inviting way that they had, just conversations, and they never sort of created sort of this is the way. Everyone who came in, it was like folding in new ingredients into the mixture, and so their voices would help create. So any number really.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I'm always interested in the practicalities, of how people can work together and how they get done. May I also ask, and then I'll jump to these other questions, how do people maintain momentum after they've designed their little beautiful images, and then it comes to the hard yards of actually doing something with it?
So the pioneers of the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition are really some of the ones who are looking at that, because they've sort of seen the different phases of the work, where they had the initial excitement and got a lot of PR back in 2020, and then created the Doughnut Coalition, and so you've got policymakers who've in the city who've created the goals, and then you've got a grassroots network organizing around the change too. And they held a festival last October to bring everyone back together to say, look at all the wonderful things we've done. Let's celebrate all of the kind of the commons organizing and the way in which the city can actually support this work now. And actually that moment of celebration was also a chance to say, and what's still holding us back? And I think getting into rhythms, like an annual rhythm of giving people permission just to run at it. Don't wait, just go for what you can. And then we'll have these these windows of reflection where we get together and see what are the deeper systemic things that we still need to work through that's holding back all of these different types of projects, actually, because we recognize there's a law in place, or there's a policy or something like that that's hooking us to a paradigm or a kind of an old way of doing things.
Yeah.
And so I think they're recognizing that, and they're looking at funding structures now, and we're working with them to understand, well, how do we fund this change? we as Deal are staying small so that we can now work with our funders to say, how do we shine the light now out on all those doing the work.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Rob. And in fact, it kind of links to the first question in our chat. Matt has asked, Rob, what advice would you give to communities who are trying to turn their community created vision into real world change, especially where there's resistance from existing powers that be? Who's doing a great job at this? And maybe you've sort of touched on it in terms of, but can you give any examples of people who've perhaps started to use the Doughnut processes to overcome some of those barriers?
Sometimes the answer doesn't immediately come to me, so I'll just reflect on the bit with the powers that be is a really powerful way of describing it, because the mindset of the place might be one that they don't see the possibility that you see. Storytelling there's a huge part of what you're doing, so creating the vision and the seeds of change already underway that are showing what's possible, but not necessarily having to label anything as just one model framework. And I think that's what Regen Melbourne, in conversations I've had with them, have done so well. They've not used the word donut, they've actually centered place. They've centered the sort of the predicament that we're not regenerative. So how do we move towards a vision of a regenerative Melbourne? Now, that's a story that people can get on board without labeling it as, oh, that's post-growth economics, or that's donut economics, or that's da 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 da. And actually, people can get on board with that vision, and we've got a project which is, how do we make the Yarra River swimmable? Now, that's a really kind of interesting question that can begin to appeal to everyone. It's not a political question. It's like, that's an intrinsic kind of, I can relate to how that's great for both people who are living in the place and great for the health of the place we live in. And so, you can then point to some of the behind the scenes economic, like tools that we're offering, and, other, Greenprints tools and other kind of things that can help move towards that kind of vision. So those are a few thoughts. So we're trying to make visible with our webinars a lot of places exploring these ideas too.
Yeah.
Civic Square, I'd really recommend looking at their website. I think you shared that in the chat, Michelle, because they're using real practical tools to say they're not waiting for Birmingham City Council to get the picture. Yeah. They're creating that now. They're recognizing that the change needed to overcome all these things like climate change, biodiversity loss, that have been like hundreds of years in the making. It's not going to be a short electoral cycle that's going to undo those. We're going to have to create almost like the mycelial network of kind of grassroots change that's going to support new economies coming through. So it's almost like, how do you create a community resilience in your work that doesn't require the leaders to immediately get behind it? Yes, we can work on those conversations, but also, how do we build the resilience nonetheless?
No, and it's the trick for everyone. I mean, I'm old enough in the tooth to know that for 30 years I've been working with people across different sectors trying to make positive change. Sometimes it's about changing a law, sometimes it's about removing a barrier to some kind of commercial investment, other times it's about saving a place. So I think it can often be very specific to the issue and the problem. So thanks for sharing some of your thoughts on that. Hamed has asked a question. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation. Just wondering why we don't have local responsibilities and global aspirations in that model.
Ooh, that is brilliant. What a great question.
I mean, you could, if that occurs to you while you do it, you can easily weave those conversations in. Yeah,
that's great. I've not heard that before. So, Hamed, I'd love to explore that. I think I'm gonna take that back to the team and say, what might that mean? And that's really great. That's really, really good.
Well, and
flipping things as well. Even just kind of like when we share an idea in the commons, it's we can set out boundaries. Okay, we need 2 rings. Da 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 da. If we're doing the unrolled donut, we ask you to to keep the 4 lenses, that kind of thing. But actually, play with it, do what you want with it, and then people innovate things that you'd never thought of. The Maori donut is inside out, and it's I say inside out. It has a different perspective, so it's got the the planet in the center, and so yeah, flip things around.
And Hamed, I was
the
just
other
going to mention the Greenprints approach inside the sort of analysis of human activities inside our place, whatever ecological boundaries we've chosen, actually explores power, governance, where decisions are made, who has responsibility, and its underlying agenda, because it was designed by me, a radical lawyer, is to actually think about Australia's entire legal system and to create reform based on bioregional governance. It was designed in my brain as a way of challenging state and federal and corporate power over local decision making. So I think local responsibility and who makes decisions is one of the big questions we ask when we analyse what's going on. Is really important. And then picking apart the current legal system or the governance system or the decision-making power and rethinking through examples, alternatives, citizens' assemblies, really challenging power and really imagining a very different way of making decisions about local place. Based on, Rob, in my case, I've watched for 30 years, I've watched communities battle it out with planning laws. And that's certainly when that other question about barriers and the powers that be, you know, Lend-Lease, Woolworths, they all know what's happening in their community in 20 years' time because they've already bought the land. They already know the law. Communities are constantly responding to unwanted development. We're designing Greenprints and using the Doughnut to really empower people to say, actually, we've just looked across landscape. We've looked across all of these cool maps we've got, and we see what's going on and we know what we want to change. Now we have to attach very specific actions. And I think that might come back to it, hey, the same as what you're seeing other groups do. Big picture, lots of analysis, then very particular actions that perhaps every year they come back and reflect on. You know, how many of those steps did we actually try to move forward with? So it's very exciting, very important. I'm just going to go to Aaron's question. Have there been any donut initiatives in regional areas, district donuts, outside the larger cities? And also any activity in cities in the global south?
Yes, so the regional scale, well, it was the Brussels capital region was the first region that applied the ideas, and they applied it at 4 levels from the macro perspective across the whole region, and then they went down to a through different kind of lenses of saying, what does it mean then at a project basis, and what does it mean at a kind of an individual product basis? And they looked at it at different scales. So I'd look up the Brussels Doughnut. And I mentioned Devon already, that exploring it over a regional perspective, recognizing they have a very small city in Devon, but mainly small rural communities. And it's a question that a lot of places are asking, what does it mean to apply the ideas to a rural environment, where you have different identities across these different places? So do you create like a whole box of donuts for the place, or do you kind of aggregate together? And in the global south, we've got El Monte in Chile, we have Bhutan, we have Curacao, and a number of places that we've that are now putting the ideas into their city and regional planning process, and creating 4 lenses for their place. And we, on the website, we've also got a story of how we work with people in the deal community from across the global south to understand how this methodology of the 4 lenses can be adapted, or how there are additional considerations or thoughts when looking across various global south contexts. And so I'll see if I can find that before the end of the call, just so I can share that link. And then every single session we've had, we've got sort of all the rich pickings of what was shared in that session. Often we find, the global aspiration, global responsibility is local aspirations. So that could be flipped around that way. But we know definitely that instead of the idea was trialed in global north cities, where the global responsibilities were very much saying, well, what's the impact, detrimental impact we're having on other places? How do we understand the connections there, and design ways that are more regenerative and distributive in relation to those places? But in the global south context, it's largely starting with how we're being impacted upon, and looking at that way first. So there are different changes that need to be brought in when we're looking from the global south perspective. So I'm going to go and look for that story.
Can I just ask, with Bhutan, I mean, is that linked to their index of happiness? Because
it is, yeah.
at the absolute forefront decades ago on changing from GDP. Yeah, be cool to sort of see how they connect it. So.
Yes, and yeah, they're seeing the frameworks that we're offering as ways to work through what it means to bring about that goal.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Rob. Actually a lovely comment and note from, oh, sorry, I've lost her name. Nicole. Thanks, Rob. Hello, everyone from Regen Melbourne. Hello, Nicole. Great question on maintaining the energy, Michelle. We're so in the heart of that right now. I agree that starting without waiting for too much permission. Yes. And then she's put the question here. How are we in service to this place is often our grounding question over economics. Yeah, I think that's great. Some comments, which are lovely. Thank you. Some thank yous. People have to jump off and put their kids to bed, but they can't wait to get a look at the tools. Here's a question. How does this donut model accommodate the underlying decline in net fossil energy and build that into the thriving idea?
How does this donut make money? Okay.
Well, I guess, how does the donut economy model connect with, well, really not so much the decline, but the forced transition out of fossil fuels, which we're battling with a lot in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, particularly relevant in Australia. I think it doesn't offer answers per se, but it's, there's no compatible future, obviously, with the donut economics way of thinking and continued fossil fuel energy. So it's a way to maybe make visible that obvious change that needs to happen and the impacts across the use of fossil energy. So if you were to map that across the 4 lenses, for example, you could quite easily see how the use of fossil energy locally is having ecological and social harm globally, maybe also locally, and it's certainly not regenerative thinking. So you're sort of tying yourself into that linear industrial mindset through the use of fossil energy. So a regenerative economy will run on renewables. So it's ultimately all running from the power of the sun. So it's kind of it's I guess it's making visible the change that's happening. It's not trying to replace other ways of thinking about an energy transition. It can work very much alongside. So I don't have a better answer on that.
No, I mean, that makes sense. And also, once you do that 4 lens analysis, if you're trying to look at local ecosystems, it's not exactly healthy to have a coal mine nearby or to have carbon emissions blowing around in the place. A super easy question. Oh, hang on. Sorry, guys. Get it right.
Oh, thanks, Nicole.
A super easy question. How do we balance the urgency to act with space to play when people's capacity is quite stretched?
Yeah, so there's sort of different ways that when we talk about Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we get asked, what is action? And I've been thinking about that question for quite a while and have begun to sort of identify kind of 3 different levels of action. The first level is sort of, I mentioned before, which is don't wait, just start. What are the things that you have immediate power and agency to take action on now within your life, within your business, within whichever role you take up in the economy. And if you see this vision and the action is aligned with that vision, go for it, run at that action. The second level is recognizing that we can't do things individually. There are things that are individually impossible, collectively feasible. So how do we create the spaces across the economy where we are coming together to do everything from connecting and celebrating to grieving to playing to what are all the different spaces required to make the connections with ourselves, with the other in the human world, that begin to reveal the possibilities of the new economy, that reveal the pathways forward. And so we don't have the answers individually, but actually if we're creating the spaces to play, the spaces to do all these different things, then the ideas will come. Our innate creativity and imagination will create those. but that's still just the second level. So we're seeing a lot of that donut economics facilitating that second level. But the third level is the one which is not really often spoke about, which is that there are many, the world is ever so complex. So there are many complex predicaments that we do not have an idea of how to move forward, that probably won't, the answers won't reveal themselves for many, many years. And these are kind of like generational, lifelong and beyond questions, decolonizing the economy and so forth. How do we make space just to sit with these complexities and actually not need to kind of come up with answers immediately, but just to embrace and acknowledge those things? So if we can just have space for all those things, I think that's what's needed.
Yeah.
Action in many scales, in many ways.
I love the emphasis you guys put on play and having fun with the donut. That's one good thing about the concept for sure. Michelle has asked, I'm interested in your reflections of selling the donut model to various levels of government who are focused on greenhouse gas emissions and reluctant to look at consumption or holistic impacts.
So we don't actually suggest or recommend that anyone sell the idea or push the idea on anyone. Instead, one of our core principles is to say, go where the energy is.
Yeah.
So don't knock on closed doors. Don't expend your energy on the wrapping your hand on the wood. No, just go with who already wants to dance with these ideas, and then when they're ready to talk, then you can embrace that too. However, we do know lots of communities, lots of grassroots communities want to make visible what they're doing and have the conversations, and so there is a bit of a tension there in places. But yeah, and we know there's also a challenge at the many levels of government. So the various jurisdictional levels, you have different powers to act over different things impacting your vision. So the donut we do see actually as a kind of an idea that can connect many levels if we're all working towards this goal together. So that's yeah, I don't know many other models that can really be as inspiring and motivating to both the top-down traditional political level, and then also the grassroots organizing level as well. Yeah, and it's great that the places like Regen Melbourne, I've heard some people within that team describe them as not top down or bottom up, but middle out.
Very lovely. I like that. Just before I go to Andrew's question, I just wanted to mention to folks who are interested in the convincing governments of good things, and I'm just putting the New Economy Network Australia's email website in there. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which forged up about a year after NENA was formed, which is absolutely supportive of Doughnut Economics, with Catherine Trebek, part of We All Alliance, a former colleague at Oxfam of Kate Raworth, and was around when Kate was designing the donut. Wellbeing Economics, and we've all heard of the New Zealand Wellbeing Budget, is surprisingly starting to get a bit of takeoff here in Australia. At the New Economy Network Australia conference last year, we held a panel discussion between folks at the ACT government in Western Australia, New South Wales, and Victoria. And we've got different government agencies, a lot of different groups. And you may be very surprised to know that challenging GDP and creating a wellbeing budget is actually starting to be on the bubble in Western Australia. And there's a whole bunch of really cool things happening. And I just wanted to mention that, Rob, and I'll come back to the next question, because we're about to organise 3 webinars for We All Australia to talk about what's going on in the wellbeing budget space. So if you're not already on the mailing list for the neweconomy.org.au, please jump on there. NENA is a co-host tonight, but also looking at a whole bunch of other wellbeing economy events, activities, and initiatives. So that's a little plug for the cool things happening in Australia. Andrew has a great question, which I'm sure you've already read, Rob. Very interesting presentation, Rob, thank you. I'm curious about whether the concept of controlled collapse is seen as overlapping with the Doughnut Economics aims. Do you mean degrowth or actual collapse?
Actual collapse.
Okay, I'm going to leave that one to you, Rob.
Yeah. So God, I'm putting an absolute blank. What's Jem Bendel's paper on where we recognize, collapses, and there's a certain kind of deep adaptation that we actually need to recognize. This is all going to, we need to move beyond trying to avert crisis and actually just embrace the crises that are, the widespread crises that are going to happen, and we should be shifting towards policies like that. I think donut economics is operating in donut economics' role within this wide movement of change is to offer something to be for, like practice as protest, saying we can aim for the donut and we can try and bring about regenerative and distributive economies and put our energy into something where has almost invites the creative kind of moving towards positive energy of it. So it's not to say it's incompatible with the concept of controlled collapse, but it is embracing the kind of the life supporting kind of processes that we can still within our power to create. And so whilst there is a role for embracing the scenarios of collapse, it doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think everyone has I think donut economics speaks to a wide variety of people, but it won't necessarily, it's definitely not speaking to everyone. So it's kind of, some people talk about pessimists and optimists. And I guess absolutely great, room for everyone, as long as you take up action and you don't sort of think, I'm an optimist, everything's going to be okay, don't need to act, or I'm a pessimist, it's all screwed and we don't need to act. It's like, how can you both, in whatever role and perspective you have, whichever tools you're taking, that we're working towards something. And it might not be that we ever get into the donut, and indeed there's not any nation in the world that's currently in the donut, but I guess it's a direction we can do our best to move towards, and any movement towards the donut is going to mitigate that collapse, the severity of that collapse.
Well, can I just add to that with a colourful term I've been using for years, which I stole from someone else? I'm an apocalyptimist. I'm optimistic that we can do many, many good things, even though perhaps we are indeed facing serious apocalypse-style collapse. And I was going to say Greenprints was designed from kind of the ground up, as in what can Mother Nature support? What can we do in the face of climate change? Someone else has just put apocalyptimist. That's where I must have stolen it from, Sam Alexander. He's an Aussie bloke, a brilliant guy, Rob, who's done a lot of work on voluntary simplicity. But I was going to say Greenprints has been designed to say, whatever happens in the future, whatever's going on, how do we live in this place? And that's where we have to analyze what's happening to this place. What's climate change doing? What are we doing with the fires? What's happened with the floods? What's happening with our soils? What's happening with land degradation? It's really, really deeply embedded into country, our term, Rob, for place. And so whatever happens, collapse of current society, collapse of current ecology, we have to work with what's real, the biophysical realities of where we live, and do exactly as Rob said, work our hardest to save the good stuff, to restore what we can, and to handle what change is coming.
And just to add to that, Michelle, the minds, we don't give answers. We really invite people to shift their mindset to one that's more adaptable, to one that is more embracing of complexity. That thinks thinks holistically, thinks connectedly, and if we are to, things are to collapse, that's a mindset that's going to serve. It's going to be, we're going to be best placed to adapt to, if we're practicing that way of thinking now.
Absolutely. And it's interesting hearing perhaps slightly different takes too. It's like an Australian conversing with Europe. It's like this continent is quite different to Europe. It's got a much smaller population, and a lot of our work is so deeply embedded in country, in land, soils, plants, forests, vegetation. Like for us, certainly in AELA, that's the starting point. What can the nearby eucalypt forest support? How are the animals going? What's really going on in this place? Adaptability and all those universal kind of properties are really important for the human. But if we're going to live in a place forever, then how do we know that place? Because we've got such a big continent, you know, we've got rainforests, we've got deserts, eucalypt forests, rain, you know, jungly spaces. So how do we actually, as particularly the non-Indigenous people on this continent, and we had this awesome decolonizing workshop on Friday. If anyone missed it, the recordings are now up with some Indigenous friends about how do we unpack our brains and get to know this place so that we can in fact stop wrecking the joint and just love it and care for it. So great question from Sue. She has put, hang on, a couple whizzed past. I'm curious about how the framing questions might be changing in doing this work and what different cultures might be asking and what you might be noticing. Actually, it's kind of linked to what I was just talking about. But Rob, is there a trajectory that you're noticing in how people frame issues? There's definitely an evolution, isn't there? People are getting better at asking good questions.
Yeah, so everywhere asked their question differently. I've not necessarily seen a trajectory, but we're really only beginning to see enough places to explore the four lenses, if you like, of local aspiration, global responsibility, you know, what it means to thrive here with a thriving place and respect the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet. Those are the kind of the questions that we're really offering. And so everyone's bringing their own, you know, their own take on what those questions mean. But it's, as long as it's got that sort of that the global connection and recognizing your community thriving depends on the thriving community, you know, that you can't see, that anyone can take that in their own direction and ask different questions. And if we're all asking those questions in every place around the world, we can go off and do our individual work and come up with our own strategies for change in our individual places, but we are all held in those connections. It's like immediately becomes like global movement for change if we're all asking those kind of those thriving questions together. And it's sort of they're uniting questions as much as they offer space for your own, you know, your own unique place-based pathways.
That's
so
excellent.
yeah, as long as you kind of held within that kind of way of thinking, then there are so many questions within that to explore.
Hey Rob, we've only got about 3 minutes left, but I have noticed there's no extra questions. Can I be indulgent and ask you to talk us through just a little bit more detail? And you can obviously bring up that slide if that helps. But because we're literally about to embark on a city portrait adventure in Brisbane, I wonder if you could just talk us through what you were doing in or what they did in the Amsterdam, like some of the a bit more nitty gritty on the questions, even if you could make the slide a little bigger, just to run people through. When you do a city portrait, what was it?
That's well, instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is go into necessarily the nitty gritty. I'm going to point you to where you can go into the nitty gritty, because there's so much to explore. And I'm actually going to share a different screen, because if you go to the Deal website, you'll find the news article that launches these new unrolled Doughnut set of tools for your place. And so there are 5 tools that we offer. Introducing the 4 lenses that I've kind of begun to do today, but it actually goes into more detail. Actually, the last one here goes into every single dimension, has all the pictures and explanation of what it is. But then we offer these kind of 4 kind of workshoppy and kind of process methodology tools. One's to create a community portrait of place, one's to create a data portrait of place, and then one's to explore like a specific topic, policy, strategy project in the center of the 4 lenses. Now, Amsterdam pioneered this data portrait of place approach. Now, version 1 was published in July 2020, and you can read all of the different approaches that they've taken, all the choices they made, the questions they worked with, the data they found, and it's been adapted now based on the workshops of the Global South co-creative process and all the practice that's happened in the 18 months since that was launched. But we've also now complemented that with the richness of the community portrait place, which is based on lived experience. So if you go through this, you can go to the data portrait place, and if you were to this is a snapshot of what you see. You know, you go into each of the 4 lenses and look at the different approaches. It goes into there's a lot of appendices data that's available there. So yeah, there's a lot to be explored through these tools. You know, this is really to sort of sit down with. You know, that I can't see how many pages in total here, but there's a lot to chew through here. So we point to different places here, lots of examples, useful resources that you can go into, things to keep in mind. So inspiring, places that have already done this. I mentioned Brussels and Curacao and Barbados, Melbourne, and there are a lot of places that are getting a maturity, that they're to a maturity where they're now publishing what they've done. And the more you sort of share what you've done, the more it's going to help others start their journey too.
Brilliant. That's perfect. And look at that, 7:29. We've got 1 minute left. So lots of folks are saying, thank you. This is wonderful. And I just wanted to do, before I do, a huge thank you for Rob, and release him back into the wild so he can go and chase puffins around in the Orkneys. I want to give you a quick guided tour of where to go for a bit more info. If you are interested in connecting with the Regen movement, and I'm sorry, someone asked a lovely question about, can anyone join? Absolutely. If you get lost, where a whole bunch of us are about to set up a sort of Regen Australia email address and a place, but the New Economy Network Australia website, so neweconomy.org.au. If you go to the homepage and you scroll down a bit, you'll see these banners going Regen Brisbane, Regen Sydney, Regenerative Songlines, which is the Indigenous-led initiative. If you click on that, you'll find web pages to all the different folks. Just contact people. If in doubt, email Kira, K-I-R-A, at earthlaws.org.au. She'll probably be rolling her eyes with joy as she hears me give out her email address. And we will help you connect with anyone if we know where you're based, and we'll tell you where to connect. We will be staying, as Regen Brisbane, we'll be staying in touch with Deal and Rob, whether he likes it or not. Whatever we get up to, we'll be sharing on their website. So if you want more connectivity through to the Doughnut folks or through with us, please just get in touch anytime. So I would like to say a huge thank you to Rob for sharing his time when he's about to go on leave and spend time with his family. It's been really terrific to hear. I've been watching Doughnut Economics since about 2018. And we had Kate speak at our conference at NENA in 2017. So seeing it grow, I was watching as people disappeared in designing up the Doughnut Economic Action Lab. So it's really exciting to see a global movement of people who give a toss about moving towards a regenerative world. So thank you for your time, Rob. It's been fabulous. We will be staying in touch. And if you ever have any need for a bunch of folks from Australia, do know there's a massive and growing network of folks already connected to New Economy, but more and more connecting to the Doughnut. So we're here if you need us, and we'll be in touch if we need you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Michelle. Hosted so beautifully, inspired by Greenprints and all you're doing. It's just absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. Well, I would like to see a photo of a puffin in return for hosting you here this evening online. I love those little birds. They move like strange wind-up toys. I was quite surprised at how they move. Yeah, it's so weird. Well, you'll see there's lots of lovely thank yous coming through. So yeah, seriously, Rob, thanks for your time, Dal. And we hope to see you again on our emails one day soon.
Great. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Really grateful to you. Thanks.